Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar, a panel discussion on 5 things successful companies do in interviewing. My name is Mallory Brown, and I'm a marketing manager here at Glassdoor. I'm going to be your MC for the day. Before we get started, I'd like to just offer a couple of tips for you attendees to make sure you can connect to audio successfully. As you see here, you can connect to audio in one of 2 ways. You can either click Use Telephone and dial in through your phone, or you can select Use Mic and Speakers and connect through your computer. All background lines are going to be muted to avoid any noise that would be distracting to our presenters. However, please feel free to ask any questions in the questions pane you see here. I'll be monitoring that dialog box throughout the webinar, and time allowing, we'll address some of the best questions we receive at the end of today's presentation. For all of you social butterflies out there, we highly encourage you to interact with us on Twitter throughout today's presentation at the hashtag GDChat, and our handle is @GD4Employers. That's GDFOR Employers. Your moderator for today is the wonderful Lisa Holden. She is the Manager of Employer Communications here at Glassdoor. She'll be moderating today's session and asking some fantastic top questions about interviewing to our panel. At this point, I'll hand it off to Lisa.
Thanks, Mallory, and hello everyone on the line. Thank you for taking the time. I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. First up is the wonderful Andy Keno. He's a field recruiter at DSW, which I know I'm a personal fan of. And Andy is joining us today. DSW was one of the winners of our Candidate's Choice Award, the list of the best places to interview. And Andy, I'd like to kick it off by asking you if you can tell us a word or two or a short description of what makes your interview process special.
You know, I think, thank you so much for inviting us to the call. I think one of the things that makes us special is that we really try to make it about the candidate. We really want to understand what they're looking for. We want to understand what's important to them from a cultural standpoint. But we try to look at our company as a fun organization. So we typically would ask a question that may sound like, if you were a shoe, what kind of shoe would you be? Because we're looking for creativity and a little bit of a fun spirit, because as a retailer, we want to have that fun engagement with our clients.
I love that. I think everyone on the phone or on the line right now is thinking about how they would answer that question. I'm torn between a high heel and a boot. But moving on to Angie Stanlin. She is the VP of Global Recruiting and Associate Services at Cerner Corporation, another winner of the best places to interview. Now, Angie, I'm hoping you can tell the audience what makes your interview process special.
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. I would say that if you were to describe our interview process in one word, it would be personalized. We make sure that whether we're having an interview with a technical candidate or a clinical candidate or a business candidate, that interview is tailored to them. So that is our goal, is that each candidate feels like their interview is personalized.
Brilliant. I think if you look at Cerner Corporation's interview reviews on Glassdoor, you'll see that theme come through, that people point to informative process where they really felt that the company made them feel special during that. So well said. Now I'd like to introduce our final panelist, Chip Lumen. Chip is the COO and co-founder of HireView. Hi, Chip. Welcome. And what makes your interview process special?
Hi. Well, thanks for having me. I would say engaging is the word that I would say describes our process best. Obviously, we'll be talking about our platform, which we use in our recruiting process. But going back to what was said earlier about the candidate experience, it really is something that is out there in the front of, you know, excitement, engaging, how we're different from a typical software company, from a culture and all that needs to be up front in the interview process.
Yep. I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today is how to make candidates feel important and feel special through a process that we can all agree can be quite daunting. I don't think any of us have ever, none of us don't know what it's like to be nervous when you're interviewing. So I think that's going to be a theme that translates through the day. So very quickly for folks on the phone, our mission here at Glassdoor is to help people everywhere find a job and company they love. And that's why we do a lot of these lists and awards, like Best Places to Work or Highest Rated CEOs, and now the Best Places to Interview, which is our Candidates' Choice Awards. And we've released this list as a way to help people everywhere find jobs and companies they love and really understand a bit more about the interview process as a whole and what they should expect from different companies. And our goal here is to help out the candidate, but it's also to help out the organizations and either celebrate those that are doing a wonderful job and also give feedback and information to help other organizations that maybe want to do a better job learn how to do that. So the list that we're referencing today represents the insights and sentiment from the people who really know these companies' interview process best, and that's their own candidates. So unlike other candidate lists and awards, there's no self-nomination process here. DSW and Cerner didn't decide to make this list. These are organizations that have great processes, and that came through in the Glassdoor reviews, which are from candidates who have interviewed at these organizations. And the winners are determined based upon interview reviews and ratings those candidates shared over the past year. So from July of 2015 to July of 2016. And we calculate each company's best place to interview score, which takes into account three major factors, which are interview experience, whether or not that was positive, interview duration, how long it took, and interview difficulty ratings that candidates elect to share on Glassdoor. And at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions about the best places to interview list as well. So, without further ado, let's dive into the 5 things successful companies do in interviewing. The first thing is branding the experience or coming up with a unique voice and message. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists, how does your interview experience reflect your employer brand? And Angie at Cerner, I will begin with you.
Thanks, Lisa. Well, Cerner is the world's largest publicly traded health information technology company. So our clients are hospitals and hospital systems across the world. What we make sure of in our interview process is that the candidate feels the same experience as our clients do. So we want to make sure that it's the same experience delivered to the candidate as we deliver to our clients. So we take the approach very specifically with a theme, an end-to-end design. We push our people out front. So we have a concierge approach. We sweat every single detail from travel to the welcome letter when they join. And then we add a few magic moments along the way. So I think if you were to ask our clients or our candidates how they would describe Cerner, it is in one word, and that's personalized.
I love that. And I'd love to hear more about those magical moments if we have more time. I may circle back to you on that. Andy at DSW, can you give me a little bit on how your interview experience reflects your employer brand?
Yes, well, as a retailer, we know that customer engagement is critical. So for us, that engagement piece with the people that we interview is also very important. We really focus on internal and external engagement, and it really starts with us not coming up with a series of questions we want to ask each individual that's very scripted. It really is about making that experience very personalized, and the way that we do that is we really ask people to walk us through their journey. We want people to be able to explain how they got to where they're at, and the reason why we think that's important is it really does allow people to speak about what they're most passionate about and where they've been most successful. And from there, we can ask behavioral-based questions that tap into those successes and those passions to determine if there is a fit within the organization. And we really feel that engagement kind of sets the standard for what we're looking for once people join our organization.
That makes a lot of sense because at so many companies, they try so hard to define their employer brand, and it comes like this message from one person at the top. But the idea of personalizing your interview experience, like you both mentioned, to really bring in the candidate's point of view, tells them that if they were to join this organization, their voice is part of that overall employer brand, which can be a really powerful message to someone who is, in that hot seat in the interview process. So, well said. And over to you, Chip. How does your interview experience reflect your employer brand?
Sure. We start with what our mission is, and for us, we believe that everyone has a story to tell, and we believe that the interview is a life-changing process. So what we're conveying as a software platform to our customers and candidates is exactly what we want our own candidates here at HireVue to experience. We're maniacal about the quality of the engagement with our candidates and our customers throughout the life cycle of our relationships. And so in the interview process, everything that anyone coming to work here goes through is the experience that we convey to our customers. So it's kind of that a unique piece of, here's who we are, and we're looking for people that are passionate about helping people, find that next adventure in their life and be successful in getting, a job through the interview process. So that's how we align the two together.
I see. And this brand idea is so important because a lot of these organizations that we're talking to that are on the phone right now or more broadly have so many office locations and have a really wide presence both nationally and internationally. So my next question is, how do you ensure a consistent interview experience across multiple locations and really bring that personalization and that same level of engagement, but bring consistency to the entire process? And to start us off, Chip, I will look to you.
Sure. Well, as part of the application process, when somebody decides they want to come to work for HireVue, they're going to apply, and once we determine that they're qualified, they're going to be invited to take an on-demand video interview. And that interview allows us the opportunity to drive a consistent, structured approach across all candidates, across all geographies, because everybody's taking the same interview. So we don't have to worry about the variability of different recruiters or hiring managers asking questions. So the platform itself helps drive that. And we've built out structured interviews, behavioral-based interviews, and we'll talk a little bit later about those experiences, but we use technology to drive that. And then when we engage with our customers, we have interview guides, whether we're doing a live video interview or when they come on site to visit our location. We've got everything already kind of articulated through a validation process, an assessment process, to make sure that those questions that we're asking are getting to the right outcomes.
That makes sense. And consistency is something that we saw when we announced the winners of this list and we looked at the Glassdoor reviews. We saw over and over that candidates pointed to a consistent experience. And I think that's really important as you're going in. You want as much information as you can get about what you will expect, and consistency is a great way to set candidates up for success. Angie at Cerner, over to you. Same question.
Well, we have recruiting teams in all of our locations, so in the 13 different countries, and they all report centrally into Kansas City, which allows us to consistently manage our recruiting process. We also spend an enormous amount of time with the recruiters and interviewers in a training method on the behavioral interviews, so methodology. So it's a very consistent approach no matter where in the world.
That's great. And Andy at DSW, how about you on consistency?
Yeah, we're quite a bit more challenged because we have 481 stores in 42 states plus Puerto Rico, and then our distribution centers. And we have varying levels of managers interviewing candidates. And one of the things that we've spent a lot of time doing is really training the variability of skill sets by virtue of developing online learning classes, having senior management come into stores and distribution centers and lead the way and model the behaviors and observe interviews underway and give coaching and feedback after interviews to try to create more consistency across the organization. But for us in retail, it is a challenge, and we faced it head on with focusing on the development of our management teams to be able to have stronger tools in their tool belt.
Smart. Very smart. It's 481 stores. I can't imagine. Glassdoor has 6 or 7 offices now, and I'm already losing count. Over to the next kind of category that we're going to be talking about today is measuring success. And when we think about measuring success when it comes to our interview process, Andy at DSW, I'm going to start with you here when I ask, what kind of data do you rely on to determine what's working or perhaps not working when it comes to your interview process?
You know, I will say to you that that's probably one of our opportunities. I mean, we certainly do look at comments on Glassdoor to give us insight in regards to where we have opportunities based on the candidates' experiences. But one of the things that we're doing and continue to do is to continue to raise the bar by focusing on that development and those observations at the varying degree of skill sets of those managers to make sure that we're trying to deal with it out of the gate versus having to deal with it from a negative perspective by getting negative feedback. So I wouldn't say to you that we're perfect in that aspect, but we know it's an opportunity, and you know, whatever data we do get that we can go back and review with hiring managers, we do review and try to seek understanding about what we can do better the next time so that we eliminate any kind of negative perceptions that candidates have on the organization.
Yeah, I think when it comes to data, I would say none of us are perfect, but the idea of using data to improve is certainly an important one, and I bet it'll be a theme that comes through in our other answers here. Angie at Cerner, I'll kick it over to you. What kind of data do you rely on to determine what's working and not working?
You know, we rely on candidate feedback surveys, and we in interviewer feedback, but I'd say most importantly, we are very hands-on in observation. So myself, my managers, peers will go and actually experience an interview day, or if we have a group in, or we spend an enormous amount of time working with our partners, our transportation partners, our hotel partners, to understand how the candidate's experience, how the candidate is actually experiencing the interview. So I'd say ours is very, very hands-on. I mean, there is some data, but I would say more personal and hands-on approach.
And we're talking about both qualitative and quantitative data here, so I think observation is a key element of this. The interview doesn't end when the candidate walks out the door and you decide whether or not to hire them. It should be an ongoing process where you're looking at your processes and allowing transparency throughout the organization into that. So for the folks on the phone, I think observation is a key factor here. And Chip at HireView, let's close it out with you. What kind of data do you look at?
So similar to Andy and Angie, we're doing those types of surveys, observational. I think the other thing to add on is the performance, right? What happens once somebody gets here, and are you really tying into how well they do on the job and bringing that back into the process to see if we need to change the interview questions, change the approach, and those kind of things. But I think that first year retention and performance data is also important.
Retention and performance. Well, there you have it. Look at Glassdoor reviews, do those feedback surveys, and look at how the candidate performs once they're in the role. Moving on to engaging differently. I know all of our speakers mentioned engagement already as a key factor when it comes to the interview process. So when it comes to engaging with a candidate, how do you test for culture fit? And I'll start with you, Angie, at Cerner.
You know, you've heard me say multiple times we use the behavioral interviewing methodology, and I think by doing that we can determine, you know, as a candidate gives us examples of, that helps us understand, you know, how they deal with ambiguity, how they deal with stress, how they deal with change, and all of those help us determine how they would fit into the workplace at Cerner. Obviously, we are interviewing for skills, but those answers help us understand if Cerner is a good fit for this candidate or if the candidate is a good fit for Cerner.
I see. Behavioral interview methodology. I love it. And Chip, over to you at HireView. How do you test for culture fit?
So I agree with Angie on the approach on understanding what success in a role looks like. I think the other important part of this is the realistic job preview. If you're letting your candidates know exactly what it is they're getting into, warts and all, through, you know, at the beginning of the process, that helps with the culture fit as well, because I think candidates have to take a lot of responsibility of, I understand this organization, I understand how they work, because all companies have their own culture and way of doing things. Two similar products being sold by two companies can be sold very differently based on their culture. So I think that that's kind of my perspective on that, is being very clear, and we're going to talk transparency later as well, around the organization and the role.
Right. I think that's really smart. When you're a candidate, you can look on Glassdoor and find out a bit more about the company, or you can ask people you know at the organization. But if the company is willing to address that themselves up front, you end up getting a more comprehensive answer to some questions you may have about the culture or the warts, as you said, and really have a more honest conversation with the one who you're going to end up going to if something's not working. So a realistic job preview is something that I wrote down that I think everyone should write down. And Andy at DSW, over to you. How do you test for a culture fit?
Several years ago, we did a look back to try to determine how we could reduce our turnover, and we went through exit surveys and found out that some of the major reasons why people were leaving was that they didn't feel it was a culture fit for them. So we developed a partnership with People Answers, which helped us to develop a profile which identifies key characteristics, attributes, and skills by position that help us to understand whether or not someone would be a culture fit. So every candidate that applies to a job in our stores takes this survey, and there is a certain threshold in which they must achieve in order to be considered for employment. And we have seen a huge, significant reduction in turnover because we are screening for culture.
I see. And that's a good note for some of the bigger organizations on the phone too, who just the leader of the organization isn't going to get to every candidate, isn't able to do a face-to-face. How do you streamline that process? And again, it goes back to consistency. What is your culture? Define it, screen for it, and create a way for many people across your organization to do that. Well said. All right, still on this engagement idea, Andy at DSW, I'm going to start with you. What's more important when it comes to interviewing that job applicant? Is it the it or the professional skills, or is it the fit, the culture, like we mentioned?
It really does depend on the position. For our hourly sales associates, without a doubt, we believe that it's culture fit first. It's the fit, because we feel we can teach the skills that they need in order to be successful from an engagement standpoint, or the ability to sell or get the work done in the stores. For managers, it's a combination. I would say it's equal between fit and it. We do look at the People Answer survey as a data point, and from that data point, then we do behavioral-based interviews to find out whether or not they've got the skills and capabilities to deliver for us. But I would say, depending on the job, it could be fit first or fit and it first.
That makes sense, because you can't teach culture.
Right.
Chip, over to you at HireVue. How do you think about this? Is it or fit?
So I agree with Andy. It's highly dependent on the role and what you're looking at. I think one thing I'd kind of advise people when you think about culture, and Andy talked about the rigor they put around defining that. Culture can be a positive or a negative. If you've got an organization that might need to shift their go-to-market strategy or their product approach, relying on old culture to get to a new place could be problematic. So I think as you talk about culture, you have to take a step back and understand what's the business strategy, what are you trying to accomplish as an organization, and make sure you've got the right definitions of culture. And then it becomes very, very role dependent, again, based on who's doing what. And I'd say I agree with him on that. The closer you are to the customer, the more you have to live and breathe the company's culture and what your brand stands for, so that employees are aligned with the brand, because your employee is your brand in a high-touch retail or healthcare environment where you're interacting with your customers.
That makes sense. Your employee is your brand. Angie at Cerner, how about you? What's more important, it or fit?
Both, but I would say it. The skill set is certainly extremely important, but they're both very important. And I actually put the reliance back on the recruiting team to make sure that the candidate is comfortable and aware of our culture, so that they too can understand our culture and whether they feel like we're a culture they want to join or whether we are a good fit for them.
That makes a lot of sense. It's just like we said, this information is available to some degree on Glassdoor, on social media, etc. But if you can have that conversation up front and say, this is who we are, that can help candidates kind of self-select out of the process if they find that they're actually not a fit. So, well said. All right, I'm going to start with Chip at HireVue for this next one. It's still about engagement, but how do you hire for culture fit without discriminating or avoiding diversity?
Well, I'm going to say hopefully all of our recruiting professionals, OD and IO psychs that are on the call today know the answer. You have to start with building, a validated, structured process. An interview is ultimately an assessment, and if you're approaching that ad hoc and just kind of making it up as you go along, you're introducing risk into your organization. So the more that you're spending time on understanding roles, understanding the questions that elicit responses relative to how well you'll do in the role. I think culture is no different than the it when you're doing an assessment. So you have to think about it from that process and really rely on a standardized, structured, validated process, regardless of what it is you're testing for in the interview.
That makes a lot of sense. Angie at Cerner, do you feel the same way? Is it about process?
We make sure that the job description is there. We interview for the core capabilities of a candidate, the skill set match, and we want to make sure they understand our culture, and that we are a fit for them. The discrimination piece is certainly not. It's a different word for us because we look at every pipeline we can for the best skills and best talent for Cerner.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And then Andy at DSW, how do you hire for culture fit without discriminating?
Well, I think it goes down to training, number one, but number two, we already have an existing very diverse workforce. And if you remember, I did mention that we use the People Answers profiles, and those profiles are set against successful candidates within the organization, and we have a lot of successful candidates who are very diverse. So I think by virtue of using the People Answers profiles, that certainly is a starting point for us. It does also go back to making sure that we're looking at all areas in which we can recruit key talent, and it goes back to that constant observation and training and feedback to ensure that we are being as consistent as we can and not screening out people who are diverse, but screening in people who are diverse and can contribute to this organization.
Right. Screening is key. That makes sense. I think this is, our last one on engaging differently. And Andy at DSW, I'll start with you. When it comes to the interview experience, how do you put the focus on the candidate?
Well, as I said to you in the beginning of the call, we're in customer service, and our goal is to engage our customers when they walk through the door. So when we meet a prospective candidate who comes in, it is about engagement. It's about that friendly handshake. It is about making that personal connection, finding a way to connect with them in a very genuine and sincere way. And it just, that whole sense of sincerity, it has to carry through the interview process. Because a lot of times we're doing interviews in a Starbucks or in a mall. Sometimes it can be easy to get derailed, but we want to make sure that we're very in tune to the engagement with the candidate and to make sure that they have the opportunity to engage with us. Because we talk about culture, but it's a two-way street. Again, we want to make sure that they understand our culture and they are able to ask questions about our culture as we assess them in their ability to deliver the cultural behaviors that we're looking for.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And Angie at Cerner, I'll go to you next. How does your interview experience put the focus on the candidate?
Lisa, I'll describe one of our experienced Cerner days. I think that's a good example where we actually bring in the candidate the night before. They have dinner in the city, and then the next morning they have a tour of the city, explore some possible housing or lodging accommodations that, whatever, if they're going to live in that city. Then they come to campus. They may hear a general overview of Cerner. Then they will have interviews. And then they have time to sit with a peer panel or with a peer to understand the role itself and how that person, how the Cerner associate feels about their job on it, and how they experience their role day to day. In general, it's about 25% of the entire experience is the interview. We want to focus more on the candidate and allowing them to understand the location and Cerner.
You know, that is so smart. And when it comes to the feedback that we saw on Glassdoor when we were collecting data for this list, we saw a lot of companies that ended up making it onto the list do things like this. They have a welcome dinner, or they have an opportunity for candidates to meet with people that will not, whom they'll be managed by, but rather who they'll be peers with at the organization. And it makes such a difference. A word that Andy at DSW mentioned is sincerity, and that goes back to the idea of friendliness. And again, these people are away from home in some cases to interview, or thinking about, you know, as Angie mentioned, moving to a new city. So anything you can do to really be sincere in being friendly and being personable with these people goes an incredibly long way when it comes to their overall positive interview experience. Chip, over to you at HireVue. How does your interview experience put the focus on the candidate?
Yes, so we've completely rethought what it means to apply for a job. Most companies, we think of what am I giving and what am I getting as an applicant. And if I have to take 30 to 45 minutes to fill out my application on an ATS to get into the process, then you ask me to take a 40-minute assessment test, and then I wait, I don't know how many days or weeks to hear back from you because you like me, but you're not sure when you're going to get to me and have a contact. Our process is you apply, you take the on-demand interview, and our Insights product is an assessment-based product. It scores that interview, again, based on the structured interview, responses, past scoring history, and performance, to now move you into the process where you're automatically scheduled to take to have an interaction either by video or live with a recruiter. So all of that upfront work can be done with a 5 to 7 question interview where I'm just answering those questions and telling my story, as opposed to going through all of those hoops at the beginning. And you think about that experience and how you turn it around. When the recruiter now calls or the hiring manager calls to engage, they know you, they are interested, and that engagement is very different than that first call that often goes out by a recruiter that's just, hi, are you still interested? How much money do you make? Are you still open? What are your hours? All of those kind of things. That first engagement is that first interaction is much more engaging because the hiring manager or recruiter is very interested in the candidate. And you've now collapsed a 3, 4, 6-week process into, we have customers who have done this, into a few days. So it's really, what's the give, what's the get, and what are you forcing people to do just to get in the door and hopefully have a chance to talk to you?
Right, right. It's about getting that story, I think, is so important, again, in making the candidate feel like a person. So well said. Off to my very favorite category that we will be discussing today, which is this idea of transparency, which among many organizations can feel a little scary, but as we see over and over in the Glassdoor reviews, the idea of transparency plays out in the interview process as extremely important, and once that candidate transfers from a candidate to an employee, transparency continues to be a theme that we see among highly rated workplaces. So on the theme of transparency, Angie at Cerner, I'll begin with you. How do you ensure that candidates get a real view into what it's like to work at your company during the interview process?
Lisa, it does. It starts with the recruiter giving a very vivid description of the role and of Cerner. Everything from our benefits to, by specific location, how we fit into the community. So the recruiters spend an enormous amount of time just having conversation with the candidate. And then I mentioned earlier that we have a recruit support specialist, a concierge, that also is the intermediary between the candidate and the recruiter. They too help the candidate understand the level of high touch that we have, and that's very consistent throughout the company. And then the interviewer themselves will spend a fair amount of time allowing the candidate to ask questions about Cerner, about the role itself, about the community. So it is a focus on opening it up to the candidate to help them learn or ask questions about the company, and not be afraid to have them do so.
That makes a lot of sense. And Chip, at HireVue, how about you? How do you ensure that candidates get a real view into what it's like?
It starts from an open source mentality. We have #ViewNation. Everything that we do, all employees are engaged in social. We encourage it. Part of your orientation is we make sure that you've got Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, those kind of things. And if you're using them, how do you engage to share what it's like to be a part of HireVue? So we take a web approach. We have a social media strategy that is about our employment brand, and then in the interview process, we have the ability to add video before and after the on-demands. So those are either messages from managers, it's realistic job previews. The closing videos tell you more. So every touch point we have, we're making sure that there's an opportunity to educate folks more. And in the interview process, we always include peers. So when you're getting into the final phase, you're not only interviewing with the executives and the managers and all that, but you get to spend time with the people you're going to work with, because that's ultimately what's going to close the deal.
Totally. And that's what's going to keep people ultimately. And so many people talk about, like, even if they don't like their job, at least they like the people they work with. And so to give them that insight up front is really key. And I want to reiterate what you said about not only letting employees have a voice on social, but encouraging that voice on social, because this is a good idea, not just for your interview experience and giving the candidates more information, but your employer brand overall. The idea of encouraging each and every person at your workforce to share their own unique voice about what makes your organization great is just like a spark plug for your employer brand. It just really takes it to the next level. So I appreciate you saying that. Andy at DSW, over to you. How do you ensure that candidates? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think we do encourage our teams to use social media to express their perceptions, their feelings about our organization, and we've spent a lot of time educating our employees about the impact that Glassdoor and LinkedIn can have on helping others to make choices. And we do realize that every company has its pros and its cons. So when we encourage our folks to write reviews on Glassdoor, we give them permission to identify what they view are some of the cons, because we feel that that's in the best interest of the organization, and we are aware that we have opportunities to improve the candidate experience and the associate experience. I think it goes back to training. Again, we want to make sure that we train our managers to really be very clear on what the job expectations are. We don't try to oversell what the opportunity is. We don't try to make the job seem easier than it is or more glamorous than it is, because we realize that in doing so, that results in higher turnover. So one of the ways we can perhaps gauge whether or not we are being transparent is by looking at the rolling 12 turnover to determine, are we really not being truthful and honest about the roles that we're hiring to, and is that why we're having turnover? So we use a little bit of data, and certainly the understanding of the need to keep going back and continuing to train and hone in on the hiring manager's ability to be very transparent and know that it's okay.
Brilliant. Using data to assess your transparency. I think that's really important. And, this is my favorite topic because it can be a little bit controversial here. The idea of transparency at its core can be a little scary. And so, Angie at Cerner, I'd love to start with you by asking, transparency can be challenging. So why are we talking about it? What's the benefit of being upfront with candidates?
Lisa, we have a very common saying at Cerner, and that is the no surprise rule. And we all live by that. And I think that certainly is important for the candidate. They come to Cerner to interview, but we are very clear in the roles and the expectations. And, we are quick to say we are at the intersection of healthcare and technology. It's not an easy job. It's a tough job. So we don't shy away from anything, and we think that's incredibly important to the candidate so they understand, the company that they may be joining, and make sure that that's That's a place they want to be. So in my mind, it's purely the benefit is the no surprise rule.
I like that. There shouldn't be any surprises at work. It stresses you out. Chip at HireVue, how about you? What's the benefit of all this transparency talk?
Well, again, when people join, they know what they're joining. I would say, I mentioned warts and all earlier, but one person's dirty job is another person's dream job, right? And when you clearly articulate what the work is, what the results and expectations are, you're gonna get people who are excited about doing that work, and that's incredibly important. Andy talked about the retail job. Some people may make it out to be something that's different, and that's where people get let down. But when you say it's about solving problems, it's about customer service, it's, all of those things, but it may be fast-paced and crazy, someone goes, yes, that's the job I want to have, right? So that's why it's important. I think that one of the big challenges is, and you think about retail, or you think, we're a smaller company, but we have many clients who have several million candidates a year, right? And that's the challenge, is how at that kind of scale can you communicate to people effectively. And that's where you do need to rely on technology and social media and other means to be able to get your message out there, because obviously you can't talk to 5 million people in a year. So.
Right. Be clear and consistent about your transparent message. Andy at DSW, why is transparency important for you?
Well, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier when I said that that culture fit is really important for us. And we understand and have data that says that if we hire someone who's a culture fit and we can keep them engaged with the organization and promote them internally, that they will not only stay longer, but they will be more successful than having to fill higher level positions with external talent. So it really does boil down to less turnover, more success within the organization, because we can grow careers and have people remain committed to the organization for a very long period of time.
That's what we want, right? Transparent in the interview process means a more engaged and knowledgeable early employee going in who's going to stay longer. So exactly. On to our last section here about what great companies do during their interview process. This all boils down to communicating effectively. So when we think about our communication during the interview process, everything we're putting out on our employer brand, Chip at HireVue, I'll start with you when I ask, what do you suggest recruiters do if there are large discrepancies in how interviewers evaluate a candidate?
It goes back to what I was talking about earlier. This is one of the things you want to identify up front, clearly understanding the role, understanding what the performance, good performance looks like. So you have to make sure that you've got that to be able to then align your hiring managers to whatever your scoring methodology is as they're doing the interviews, right? So you've got to get that up front. We're able to use our technology. It's a bit of a internal calibration tool. If you record a hiring manager doing a live interview and they come back and say, I thought this candidate was X, and the recruiter goes, no, they were Y, you can use that video to actually calibrate. Go back to, well, this question and this response caused you to think this, I thought this, and it allows you to go in and evaluate those scores with the hiring managers, which over time just gets a tighter alignment, better scoring, and better outcomes.
Right. More transparency, more information. Andy at DSW, how about you?
Yeah, I think it really is making sure that there's clear understanding from not only the recruiter but the hiring manager about what it is that we're looking for. And if there's a huge discrepancy, that's concerning, because either someone's not assessing at the right level or there wasn't clear and transparent communication around what it is that we're looking for. But if there is a discrepancy, it really is sitting at a table and really talking about what we saw that may have been similar and what we saw that was different. And it's about maybe influencing, but not overselling a candidate. I don't believe in that. I really believe it's about listening, asking questions to seek understanding, and if you feel that the hiring manager may have misunderstood or misread the candidate, to see if there's any reason to influence. And if not, it really does boil down to letting the hiring manager make the decision, because by putting yourself in a position as a recruiter to force the issue, you find yourself heading down a very dangerous path.
Makes sense. And Angie at Cerner, what do you think about this?
So I, as Andy said, when you have the conversation, we often have a data integration session where we have all of the interviewers in a room so they can share with each other. And then often we will have a talent assessor in the room who is someone who did not interview the candidate but is very familiar with the skill set needed for the role. And so that person is objective, can ask questions to those that may be for the candidate or against the candidate, and to the point of not influence, but actually just be almost a bystander who can ask the questions to make sure that we are truly evaluating the skills of the candidate.
That makes a lot of sense. And with that, I will take us into our last planned question here, and then we'll move over to Q&A. And this will go to Chip at HireVue first. How do you ensure that candidates' feedback makes it back to the interviewers and hiring managers after the process has taken place?
Sure, this comes back to conducting surveys, collecting feedback from your candidates, and making sure that you're reporting that out, and holding the talent acquisition function and the hiring managers accountable for sending reports out is one thing, but are they reading them, reacting, and making them part of the ongoing improvement process? So it's all about measuring, reporting, and holding people accountable.
Mm-hmm. Holding people accountable, exactly. Andy at DSW, how about that at your 400 plus stores worldwide?
I'll focus on Glassdoor because every week I go into Glassdoor and I look at the reviews from the interview experience, and I will send out copies of those reviews, good, bad, and indifferent, to not only the store managers who are doing the in-the-market hiring, but to their direct supervisors, their supervisors, as well as their regional HR managers, because I want to make sure that when there are corporate visits to these stores that we're praising those who are doing really well in creating a positive candidate experience, and with those that aren't, that we're really trying to ask questions to seek understanding as to what may have created a negative candidate experience, and or spending time if there's certain locations that are what I would call repeat offenders, that we're really trying to watch and understand how we can better coach and develop people to provide a better experience.
Right. It goes back to the data, asking the question, getting the answer, and getting better from there. Well said. Angie, let's have you close it out. How do you ensure candidates' feedback makes it back?
Sure. So, as Chip said, accountability. But we do, through surveys, we want to understand how the experience was, what the candidate thought, and then we do have a very, very close partnership with our interviewers, and we are very candid with them. We ask for their feedback as well, and then we partner to either have them move forward in the interview experience, or there may be a time where an interviewer is not the best at interviewing, and we've learned that, and we remove them from our process.
That makes a lot of sense. This is all about being honest and looking at as much data as you can to get to the best conclusion possible. So I am going to kick it over to our audience portion of questions here. We have some great questions lined up for our panelists. Angie, there is one that is addressed to you, so I'll have you go first. The question is, it was mentioned earlier that a survey is used to give candidates while going through the application process. What company or source would you recommend we use for this kind of survey? And what are some examples of magic moments in your interview process?
We actually use our own tool. So we have our own tool that we use. So I can't recommend a brand name. We have created our own.
Okay. Makes sense. And I know the second part of that question referred to the magic moments that you talked about when you're talking about bringing the candidate into the organization for the first time. Do you have any to share with us, or are those strictly for candidates?
Oh, no. I mean, it can be something as, it can be something that we know that the candidate's flight was delayed the night before, and they got in very late, and because we strongly monitor that. So the next morning, a magic moment may be, hey, we understand, you were in late last night. We've now switched your schedule around a little bit this morning to allow you a little time to prepare, as we know that, last night maybe you weren't able to do that. So it can be as simple as that. or it can be I hand sign every welcome letter for every candidate. So I hand sign thousands of welcome letters a year, and we hope that that's a magic moment for them to know that it's not just a form that they receive in their hotel room.
Yeah, I think that's great, and that goes back to attention to detail, right? You're looking at ways that you can make that candidate's experience a little bit better, and it can't be predefined completely. So I think that's really important for recruiters and hiring managers on the phone to understand. Andy at DSW, you got a question that is, what would the optimal turnover rate or range be for field employees as compared to field managers?
That's a great question. I don't have the specific answer to that. I will tell you, as our organization has been experiencing relatively low turnover. You'll see the combined turnover at about 60%, with management turnover about 18%. So you can extrapolate that data there. We know that we always will have and continue to have a higher level of turnover at the associate level than we will at managers. And a lot of it has to do with we're hiring part-time employees who typically are college age or a little bit older, and once they get their full-time job or their career job, they move on.
And then another one for Andy at DSW. Folks wanted to know, do you believe that your interview process really reflects the culture of your company?
I would hope that it would. I would tell you that we've got an opportunity to be more consistent. And again, that's the challenge that we are faced with when we look at the fact that we have 481 stores across 42 states, Puerto Rico, and DC. I think that that's why we continue to make training a continued focus. We're updating our training right now around interviewing as I speak, and we're going to be rolling it out as we head into peak holiday hiring. So for us, the only way that we can get better at being consistent is to make sure that hiring managers are being trained and that there is follow-up with the many layers of management within the organization.
That makes sense. Chip, this question is for you, and I think it goes back to that process you were talking about earlier when it comes to having that initial on-demand video interview that allows you to be very consistent. The question is, how do you make the interview personalized when you're using an on-demand service? Wouldn't the candidates think that that could be cold and perhaps not personalized?
Well, I'll start with, we've had over 800,000 candidate responses to our NPS and satisfaction survey, and across that category specifically on would I recommend this, our NPS is above 60, and on the satisfaction they're above 90%, because again, you have to rethink what we're talking about in this process. Applying into a black hole is extremely disconcerting and disengaging. So the opportunity to tell your story at application is what's different. The actual technology itself, again, allows video up front, where a hiring manager, or it could be a message from the CEO or the company, conveys something about the job or the interview. Could be a realistic job preview. We've had companies do like an up and down the route salesperson. They show what that's like right up front. The questions themselves are asked in video, text, multiple choice, etc. We have customers, we've actually shared some of them. One of a children's hospital, they actually had patients, children, ask the questions to the nurses to drive that engagement right up front. We had a school, same thing, students ask the questions. We have an airline. You've seen some of those funny videos on airlines that you get in. They actually have those questions asked by flight attendants to the candidates. So again, at scale where you might have 20,000 people apply in 1 month, you can drive personalization and drive engagement through technology at scale. And the numbers state it. Candidates actually are excited about the process.
Hi everyone, this is Mallory, your MC for the day, hopping in here. I actually got a couple of questions that I think are best geared toward Lisa, so I'm going to go ahead and ask her a few.
All right, hot seat.
Here we go. All right, Lisa. If employees are on social media and advertise negatives about your company, How should you respond, if at all?
Well, this is a very interesting question because we spent so much time on transparency, right? And the thing about transparency is that it shows the good and the bad. And when you're encouraging your employees to share their candid feedback about your organization, it's not unrealistic that they would have both pros and cons to share. And that's why on Glassdoor, we encourage anyone who leaves a review to share both a pro and a con to give someone a more comprehensive look at what your organization is really like. So the benefit that you get from folks sharing negative feedback is balance. So people are sharing what's good about your organization and what's negative, and that results in a more comprehensive picture that allows potential candidates who would have ended up not being a fit for some of those negative reasons self-select out of the process before your recruiters go down a road a bit too far, perhaps. And the other thing I would say about negativity is that it brings an authenticity to the process. So you're not just getting more information, but you feel like you're getting a more real look at a company. Because the truth is, any restaurant that you eat at, any pet groomer you go to, any job that you have has its pros and cons. So knowing that up front can help people make more informed decisions, and you actually end up with candidates who are willing to take the bad with the good and sign up for your organization and feel very engaged. So it can be a real positive. To hit on how exactly you respond to that, I think I'm a PR person, I'm a communications person by training, and I would say that it's very important to be gracious and consistent in your answers. So appreciative of feedback is always a good standpoint to come from when you're speaking on behalf of your own organization. So thank them for the feedback and let them know, if you can, what you're doing to improve.
Thank you for shedding light on that, Lisa. I do have one more question for you before we go back to our fantastic panelists. The question is, can you talk a bit more about what a difficult interview is and how that factored into the Glassdoor ratings you touched on when you were talking about the methodology around best places to interview?
I am so happy we got this question. So Glassdoor has a chief economist on staff. His name is Andrew Chamberlain, and he did some fantastic research earlier in the year where he looked at optimal interview difficulty level. And what he did was he looked at the data that we have on Glassdoor where people rate how difficult their interview process was and how satisfied they end up being at their organizations later on. And what he found was that a fairly difficult interview process actually results in the most optimally satisfied employee later on. So if you do it on a scale of 1 to 5, a level 4 difficulty is ideal for producing a candidate who ends up being more satisfied later on in the role. So the biggest takeaway for you recruiters out there and you hiring managers is really don't be afraid of making it a difficult process, because you're actually sussing out candidates who would end up either being unsatisfied or unfitting later on. The other thing I'll say is that a number 5 difficult interview process did not lead to a satisfied candidate. It was a level 4. So the takeaway is that an interview process can be too difficult. It can scare away a candidate or make a candidate feel like they're not the right fit as well. So think about finding that balance where it's pretty hard, but it's not the hardest it can be.
Thank you for sharing that with everyone. I'm sure that was useful information. We'll go back to some questions for our panelists, and thank you to everyone on the line who contributed a question. We only have a couple minutes left, so we'll get through as many as we can.
Oh, okay, back to me. All right, this doesn't have a panelist identified, so any of our panelists who would like to answer this, please respond with your name, and then I'll let you take it from there, so there's no confusion. Now, with respect to Gen X applicants, is the interview process, i.e. questions, presentation, etc., is that different when you're thinking about younger candidates, and if so, how?
This Chip, so I'm a Gen Xer. Did they mean somebody younger when you said younger? But I'm feeling good about that. So.
Gen X younger. That means you. Take it away, Chip.
Yeah. Well, I think as you look at all the different groups, right? Millennials, boomers, etc. First off, as we look at our candidate satisfaction data, we see very little difference across a very high satisfaction level among the different age groups as we're looking at that. I think that anything you're doing really comes back to the job and the candidate experience and the employment brand, and what you're doing to appeal to someone who wants to do that job. So we're not seeing in our actual process differences amongst the generations, and therefore I think you really need to focus more on the candidate experience and what's going to appeal from a marketing perspective or a branding perspective.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. One question that I think we should go across the board with is that a few of the panelists mentioned observing the interviewer and assessing that feedback. So I'd love to hear from each of you individually. How often are you observing your kind of public perception when it comes to your interview process? How often are you actually looking at the numbers and the data when it comes to your interview process? Is this a weekly thing, a monthly thing? Are you reporting quarterly? And Angie at Cerner, we'll start with you.
Well, we have so I've mentioned several times our recruit support specialist. The manager of that team looks at it every single day, but then as a leadership team, we review it on a quarterly basis. But I would say touch points every single day.
That makes sense. And Chip, how about for you? How often are you observing this?
We're observing on a regular basis. Our CEO is always watching his ratings and scores, but our talent team, and back to kind of our social engagement strategy as a company, we're monitoring it all the time.
Makes sense. And how about Andy at DSW?
Whenever there's the opportunity. I mean, we have district managers and regional directors and regional HR managers that are visiting stores. So really depending upon when the last time that store was observed, really creates the cadence for the next time. So we try to hit each store at least once a quarter, and we would like to do it more frequently, but with all that's going on, sometimes once a quarter is the best that we can do.
Thank you so much. And this is Mallory again chiming in. We are right at the top of the hour, so we are all out of time for questions from the audience. I do want to thank everyone on the line, as well as our fantastic panelists and our moderator, Lisa, for joining today. And to everyone on the line, you will receive a recording of today's presentation in the next 24 hours. Please do look out for an email from our marketing team. Everyone have a fantastic day, and until next time, thank you.